The evening gala was in full swing, champagne flutes clinking under crystal chandeliers, everyone toasting Ethan Shen's impending billion-dollar fortune. Only one person in that room knew that 3 files in her hand would bring it all crashing down by midnight. Port City's summer dusk painted the glass skyscrapers in shades of blood red. Heat hung heavy in the air, and the distant sea shimmered like molten gold spilled across the horizon. The coastal metropolis revealed its most decadent face at this hour, office lights flickering on one by one, traffic merging into slow-moving rivers of light. And in the city's most exclusive corner, a storm was quietly gathering. The Tide Pavilion sat on the riverfront, Port City's most prestigious private club. Its gray stone walls were half hidden behind wrought iron gates overgrown with ivy. No sign marked the entrance. But anyone in Port City's business circles knew that a Tide Pavilion membership required a net worth in the tens of millions. No walk-ins, no cold calls. Every banquet was orchestrated by a dedicated private concierge team, from ingredient sourcing to lighting design, every detail calibrated to perfection. Tonight, the pavilion's grand ballroom hosted an intimate, high-stakes cocktail reception. Crystal chandeliers cast scattered light across hand-woven Persian carpets. Long tables displayed Dom Perignon chilling in ice buckets, bluefin tuna flown in from Tokyo that morning, and gold-leafed caviar canapes. Servers in starched black vests moved soundlessly through the crowd with silver trays. But the night's true centerpiece wasn't the decor. It was the couple standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by a ring of admirers. Ethan Shen wore a charcoal Italian bespoke suit, superfine wool that caught light only at certain angles, revealing subtle herringbone. His cufflinks were custom engraved with his initials. The Patek Philippe on his wrist reflected a restrained gleam, its deep blue dial like a fragment of night sky. At 32, he stood tall and handsome, with the kind of confidence, or arrogance, that came from years at the center of power. He held a champagne flute with practiced ease, accepting compliments with a slight tilt of his chin, occasionally leaning down to murmur something to his companion that made her laugh. That companion was not Vera Sue. Bella White wore a blinding gold sequined gown with a plunging neckline and a train scattered with tiny beads that caught every flicker of light. Her bare shoulders and collarbones shimmered with fine dusted powder, and a strand of South Sea pearls hung at her throat, each bead creamy and luminous. She leaned into Ethan's arm like she belonged there, laughing brightly, raising her glass at just the right moments to project the image of the perfect supportive partner. "Mr. Shen, you and Ms. White are truly a match made in heaven." A pot-bellied investor with a cigar between his fingers approached, beaming. His name was Jason Chen, a partner at a local private equity firm, known in the circles for his uncanny ability to sniff out which way the wind was blowing. "Ms. White is not only stunning, I hear she's brought back exclusive rights to an AI precision medicine algorithm that's going to take Epic Tech to the next level. I was talking to some friends at Goldman Sachs, and they're saying your Nasdaq listing next month could hit $5 billion market cap. Mr. Shen, you're on the verge of something monumental." Ethan's eyes gleamed with poorly concealed satisfaction. He smiled, that practiced, measured smile of a man accustomed to flattery but never quite immune to its effects. He patted Bella's hand where it rested on his arm, his voice low and generous, carrying that particular tone of condescension that sounded almost like magnanimity. "Jason, you're too kind. Bella has been my rock, the real reason Epic Tech is where it is today. To be honest, I'm just her assistant half the time." "Oh, Ethan, you're being modest again," Bella cooed, tilting her head against his shoulder, her glossy lips catching the light. "Without the platform you built, I'd have nowhere to apply my skills." The investors and business elites around them laughed appreciatively. Glasses were raised to Epic Tech's pre-IPO eve. People began angling for a piece of the next funding round. Then someone asked, "By the way, Mr. Shen, I don't see your wife tonight." The atmosphere shifted, just a fraction of a second. Ethan's smile didn't waver, but the warmth in his eyes cooled. Before he could respond, Bella jumped in, her voice deliberately sweet and sharp. Oh, my sister-in-law doesn't really enjoy these things. Ethan's tried so many times to bring her out, but she just won't have it. Stays home all day, won't even buy a proper dress, wears the same old things over and over. Last time Ethan took her to an industry summit, she held her fork wrong. Bella covered her mouth with a delicate laugh. Can you imagine what our international investors would think if they saw that? So Ethan has no choice, he has to let me, the chief brand officer, step in as the public face. Bella, don't, Ethan said, but his voice carried no reproach. He even managed a helpless little shrug, as if to say, you see what I have to deal with. Around them, people exchanged knowing glances. In Port City's business circles, Ethan's invisible wife was hardly a secret. She was supposedly a painfully introverted woman, socially inept, ignorant of business, content to wear dull clothes and do housework all day. Ethan had been more than generous, he hadn't divorced her, hadn't let her starve. And here was Bella, beautiful, clever, internationally connected, bringing in core technology. Everyone knew who the real Mrs. Shen was. Exactly, Jason, Bella pressed on, emboldened by Ethan's lack of pushback, her voice climbing a notch. My sister-in-law can't even string together a full sentence in English. Last time Ethan took her to meet Goldman, she just sat there like a wooden dummy, didn't say a word. Total embarrassment. That kind of washed-up housewife, that dried-up old hag, she should have been. She didn't finish. Because at that precise moment, from the corner of the ballroom's terrace, came a soft sound, the delicate click of porcelain against glass. It wasn't loud. But in the gap between Bella's sharp, condescending words, it rang out like a bell. Everyone turned. The terrace's French doors stood half open, evening breeze stirring the velvet curtains. In the shadows of a rattan side table sat a woman. She wore a simple black matte Audrey Hepburn-style gown, ankle-length, unadorned. No jewelry. Her thick, wavy hair was loosely pinned up, a few strands falling loose at her temples, stirred by the river breeze. Her face bore no makeup, her skin was pale, almost translucent, with faint shadows under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights staring at screens. She held a glass of warm water, its surface beaded with condensation. When the room's attention converged on her, she didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She didn't even lift her head to meet Ethan's or Bella's eyes. She simply set the glass down, her slender fingers releasing it with deliberate slowness, leaving a faint wet print on the glass. Then she stood. The movement was unhurried, cinematic, the black gown swaying as she rose, her hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her temple, revealing unadorned ears with no piercings. She lifted her eyes. They were striking, long and slightly upturned, the iris a clear deep amber like river-smoothed glass. But there was no warmth in them. No anger, no hurt, no unshed tears, not even calculation. Only a kind of absolute, almost unnerving stillness. The stillness before a storm. When the wind dies, the birds fall silent, all sound drains from the world, and what remains is the weight of what's about to break. Vera Sue. Ethan's legal wife of 5 years. As her face came into full light, many in the room saw her clearly for the first time. In Ethan and Bella's endless narratives, she was a hag, a wooden dummy, a frump. But the woman standing there was almost unnaturally beautiful, high, graceful brow, straight narrow nose, naturally pale lips, a clean jawline. She looked like someone had carved her with a sculptor's finest tools, every line precise, her beauty quiet and unsettling. Silence held for 3 seconds. In that time, Bella's smile cracked like dry plaster. She shrank behind Ethan, grabbing at his sleeve. Ethan's face, after the initial shock, darkened. He stepped forward, brow furrowed, voice low with barely concealed irritation. Vera? What are you doing here? Who let you in? The invitation tonight was for Epicteca's core management team, Vera said, her voice not loud but clear enough to cut through the room's ambient hum. She didn't look at him, her gaze drifted past his shoulder to Bella's whitening face. Ms. White is here. Why shouldn't I be? Or does core management in your book only include the mistress with a fancy title, while the legal wife with a marriage certificate isn't qualified to walk through the door? A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Mistress. The word landed like a scalpel, slicing through the flimsy pretense Bella and Ethan had maintained. Everyone had known, of course. No one had ever dared say it aloud. Ethan's face turned an ugly shade of purple. He lunged forward, his finger inches from Vera's nose. Vera. Have you lost your mind? This is Epicteca's most important pre-IPO event. You're going to sabotage the listing with this nonsense. Sabotage. Vera finally turned her gaze to him. Something like emotion flickered in those amber eyes, but it wasn't hurt. It was something colder, almost clinical. Pity, perhaps. The way one might look at a lab rat that had run itself into a dead end. You're right, Ethan. This is Epicteca's most important pre-IPO event. That's why I'm here. To give you a gift. She reached into her black briefcase and pulled out a slim file, its first page labeled in crisp handwriting, divorce agreement. She placed it on the table beside her, sliding it toward him. Her touch was featherlight, as if handling something fragile. But the weight of those 4 words pressed down on the room like a physical force. Mr. Shen, this is the divorce agreement I've drafted and signed. My lawyer has already sent the asset division proposal to your email. Congratulations. You're free. She paused, letting her gaze drift past him to Bella's trembling figure. From this moment on, you can officially take your chief brand officer and get the hell out of my sight. Divorce. The word struck the ballroom like a bullet. A beat of silence, and then the murmurs erupted. What? Ethan's getting divorced. Now. Who is that woman? I thought his wife was a housewife. A housewife in that dress. Look closely, that's last year's Paris Couture, limited edition, 6 figures minimum. And that watch, no logo, but the moon phase, the movement, that's Patek Philippe. 7 figures. Custom order. You can't even get on the waiting list without serious connections. Then why did Ethan say she's just a housewife? The whispers spread like ripples in water. The investors who'd been fawning over Ethan moments ago now wore expressions of shock and recalculation. Bella's face had gone beyond pale. Her carefully painted features seemed to crack, foundation separating from blush. Her lips parted. She stared at Vera's dress, that black matte couture gown she recognized from Paris Fashion Week coverage. She'd screenshotted it and sent it to Ethan, begging. He'd told her the brand had a year-long waiting list and required a personal invitation from the house. Later, he'd said they had no available sizes. And here it was, fitted perfectly on the washed-up housewife. Ethan's eyes darted to the dress too. His pupils constricted. But his shock curdled quickly into rage and humiliation. He snatched the divorce agreement from the table, crumpled it without reading, and hurled it to the floor. Vera. Don't play games with me. His voice cracked with fury. Divorce? Fine. Your choice. Don't think I don't know what you're after. You see the IPO coming and you want a piece of my equity, my assets. Dream on. He stepped closer, looming over her, his mouth twisting into a cruel smile. Let me tell you something. I transferred all my equity into a trust 6 months ago. I don't own a single share personally. And Epicteca's AI algorithm R&D. We borrowed $80 million from Bella's offshore fund. That's marital debt. You walk away with nothing, and you owe $40 million. He paused for effect, savoring his trump card. So take that crumpled paper and get out. I'll pretend this never happened. Otherwise. Otherwise what? Vera tilted her head slightly, and for the first time that evening, something like warmth entered her expression, but it wasn't what he expected. It was something close to bewilderment, the way one might watch a toddler stack blocks to the ceiling and declare they'd built a skyscraper. She blinked, her lips parted, and then she laughed. It was a soft laugh, barely more than a breath, carrying an almost affectionate amusement, as if a child had told her a delightfully nonsensical joke. Ethan went cold. He knew that laugh. He'd seen many expressions from Vera over 5 years, her focused profile at 3 a.m. while coding, her gentle hands handing him soup when he was sick, her silent towel when he came home drunk. But he'd never heard this laugh. No anger. No mockery. Not even triumph. Just lightness. Like everything he'd done, his threats, his schemes, 5 years of lies, was, in her eyes, a childish tantrum. What are you laughing at? His voice rose, a pitch of panic. The laugh faded. She looked at him with that rare, unnerving calm, like a lioness surveying a trespassing field mouse. Ethan, you're right that Bella brought the algorithm from overseas. But that's not what I'm here to argue about. She reached into her briefcase again and produced a second file, much thicker, its cover stamped with 3 crimson seals, the National Intellectual Property Office, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and the World Intellectual Property Organization. The seals pressed into the paper like brands. She didn't open it. She just tapped the cover with one slender finger. Ethan, do you remember that night 2 years ago? You came home drunk, said the company's systems needed upgrading, that you needed me to change the developer credits and timestamps on the algorithm source code to your name. I asked if you were sure. You said, Vera, it's for the IPO, valuations look better if the founder is the inventor. We'll change it back after the listing. She paused, her gaze resting on the dense text and numbers printed across the file cover. Did you really think I was stupid enough to believe that? Or did you think, even if I suspected you were lying, I wouldn't call you out? Ethan's face drained to a sickly white. His mouth opened but nothing came out. Vera didn't look at him. She stacked the 3 stamped files neatly on the table, then lifted her gaze to sweep across the room. Her voice remained low, but every word emerged clear and cold, like ice rising from a frozen lake. I'm standing here today as the sole global patent holder and copyright owner of the Qinhuan Core proprietary programming language. I'm making this formal announcement to every investor, every media representative, and every employee of Epic Tech here tonight. Epic Tech's AI Precision Medicine Algorithm version 1.0, the core asset they've been using to secure their NASDAQ listing, its entire underlying architecture and compiler rely exclusively on a language called Qinhuan Core. And that language's R&D timeline and global priority filings, from patents to copyrights, from China's IP office to the USPTO, from Europe to Japan to Singapore, all of it was completed 5 years ago, before Epic Tech was even incorporated. And every single filing lists the same name as the sole rights holder. Me. Vera Sue. She turned to Bella, whose face had gone the color of ash. In other words, Ms. White's so-called exclusive licensing agreement, and every commercial activity Epic Tech has based on it for the past 2 years, constitutes a fundamental infringement of my personal intellectual property. The ballroom exploded. What? He stole the technology from his wife. This is fraud. The NASDAQ will blacklist them. The SEC will investigate. Call our traders. Terminate all pre-IPO agreements. Pull out. Now. The investors who'd been hovering around Ethan moments ago scattered like they were fleeing radiation. Phones came out, calls were made in urgent whispers. Some left their champagne glasses on trays and walked out without a word. Ethan stood frozen, a statue struck by lightning. His jaw hung open, a ragged wheeze escaping his throat. Sweat beaded on his forehead and dripped onto his expensive collar, staining the dark fabric. He spun and grabbed Bella's shoulders, his fingers digging in white-knuckled. Bella. Tell them. That license is real. You said you got it from your advisor. Tell them. Bella had shattered. Her lips trembled. Her fingers clawed at his arms. She wanted to scream, to deny, to come up with something, but those 3 files with their international patent seals sat on the table like mountains pressing down on her chest, crushing every word back down her throat. She'd taken a few screenshots of code from Vera's scratch paper, pasted together a fake, overseas lab backstory. She hadn't even known there was a proprietary language underneath. She'd never even heard its name until today. Ethan. I didn't know. I really didn't. Bella's voice dissolved into trembling fragments. Her legs gave out, he held her up by sheer force. Vera had already gathered her files and was walking toward the exit. Her silhouette was calm amid the chaos. The black gown swayed with each unhurried step. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, a quiet, deliberate rhythm, like the tolling of a bell. Behind her, the chandeliers still blazed. The champagne still sparkled. But the world Ethan and Bella had built on lies and greed had, in this single evening, collapsed into ruins. 3 days later, the city had shed the champagne-soaked haze of the gala. Summer heat returned with a vengeance, bringing salt and asphalt fumes. Epicteca's headquarters stood in the CBD, once gleaming, now somehow shabbier, though its facade hadn't changed. Passing workers glanced up at it with curious, knowing looks. Inside, the office hummed with anxiety. Emails pinged, phones rang, and hushed conversations clustered around water coolers. HR had posted an emergency meeting for all mid-level managers at 3 p.m., the topic, crisis management and legal affairs. No one needed to guess what that meant. In the corner, a cluster of senior engineers exchanged grim looks. One had stayed up late pulling the public Qinhuan Core patent filings and cross-referencing them with Epicteca's internal codebase. The discovery had been chilling, the algorithm they'd been so proud of, the one they'd used to secure millions in government grants, was built on a core module that relied on Vera's language, without any license. We were scammed, one of them muttered. I thought Ethan had a whole overseas R&D team. Turns out, it was plagiarism. Worse. It's infringement. We built our house on someone else's foundation, and now the owner's here with the title deed and a bulldozer. Another shook his head. How long do you think this place has? Not long. In the CEO's office at the end of the hall, the scene was far worse. Shards of porcelain littered the floor, the remnants of a Qing dynasty vase Ethan had paid $60,000 for at an antique shop. Now it lay in dozens of jagged pieces across the gray carpet. A ripped document sat on the coffee table, Epictec Nasdaq Roadshow Plan version 8.0, its margins filled with annotations that would never be completed. Ethan slumped in his leather executive chair, tie loose, shirt collar unbuttoned to reveal a pulse pounding visibly in his throat. His gelled hair had gone haywire. Bloodshot eyes sat in hollow sockets. A gray stubble darkened his jaw. The confident CEO who'd commanded the Tide Pavilion Gala had vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he'd been awake for 3 days and just lost everything. His phone lay among the shattered porcelain. The screen glowed with missed calls and messages, investment partners, media inquiries, supplier demands, employee screenshots circulating on internal chat. He hadn't replied to a single one. He couldn't even open social media. He knew what he'd find: Port City tech mogul accused of IP fraud, Epictec IPO derailed, billions in default. The phone buzzed again. He jolted upright, scrambled for it, and froze at the caller ID. Titan Capital. He stared for 3 seconds, then answered. Mr. Shen, this is Mr. Chen from Titan Capital's legal team. The voice was businesslike, cold. Per Clause 14 of our investment agreement, material IP defects triggering a failed listing. We're exercising the unlimited joint liability redemption clause. You have 24 hours to repay the Series A principal of 50 million plus a 30 million penalty, totaling 80 million yuan. Legal documentation has been sent to your corporate counsel. 80 million. Ethan's voice cracked into a near shriek. Mr. Chen, we've worked together for years. You know I've never defaulted. Just give me a little time to resolve the patent issue. Mr. Shen. The lawyer's tone was flat, the blade already drawn. We've had third-party experts assess the situation. Your algorithm's core logic is substantially identical to Ms. Su's language. The infringement is clear. A Nasdaq listing is no longer feasible. We believe cutting losses is the prudent course. Additionally, a pause, and something subtle crept into the voice. I think you should know that Titan Capital's ultimate beneficial owner isn't any of our managing partners. I'd suggest you contact Matthew Lin about that. He'll be visiting your office this afternoon with the relevant documents. The call ended. Ethan stared at the dead phone in his lap, the words sinking in like stones. Ultimate beneficial owner. The phrase circled in his head, drawing him into a dark vortex. 1,000 unnoticed details surfaced: why the first investment had cleared so quickly. Why Vera had looked so unsurprised the night he'd told her the money came through. Why Titan Capital's quarterly reports always seemed to sidestep any mention of her. A terrible, impossible theory took root. Then the office door swung open. No knock. Not even the secretary's hurried attempt to announce them. Ethan looked up, his pupils shrinking. 3 people stood in the doorway. At the front stood a woman in a sharp charcoal suit, its fine wool catching light in subtle silver threads. Her hair was pinned up with a plain black clasp, revealing the clean lines of her face. She looked different from the soft, elegant figure in the Hepburn gown at the gala. She carried an edge now, like a sheathed blade, its coldness felt even through the leather. Vera Su. Behind her half-step stood a tall, sharp-featured man in a navy 3-piece suit, a tiny silver balance pin at his collar, wire-framed glasses over intelligent eyes. He carried a worn brown leather briefcase, no logo, but the quality of its stitching and leather spoke of quiet, expensive taste. Matthew Lin. A legend in Port City's legal scene, undefeated in corporate litigation. He was known for one thing: he didn't take just any case. He took cases where the law must serve justice. And he stood at Vera's side, calm and certain, as if he'd known the outcome long ago. Behind them, 2 large men in black suits stood silently at the door, like pillars. Ethan watched Vera enter, watched her sit across from him, watched her raise those clear, cold eyes to meet his. A wave of absurdity washed over him. Vera, what have you done? His voice was hoarse, his hands white-knuckled on the chair's arms. Vera didn't answer right away. She surveyed the shattered porcelain and torn documents with the detachment of someone looking at a still life. Then she brushed an invisible speck from her shoulder, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. Ethan, I've been in this office 3 times in 5 years. The first was when Epic Tech Incorporated. You were so excited, dragging me around, saying this was where your dream began. There were just a few chairs and blank walls. You pointed at that window and said one day you'd hang a company flag there. The second was 2 years ago, after the Series A, when you had it renovated. You asked what I thought. I said it looked great. You said, Vera, all of this is because of you. She paused, her gaze leaving his face for the city skyline visible through the windows. Today is the 3rd time. She looked back at him. I'm here to take back what's mine. Ethan shot up, slamming his hands on the desk, leaning forward. What are you talking about? Titan Capital. That was you. You sent them to collect. Vera, are you insane? Epic Tech is my life's work. I built this from nothing in 5 years. You can't do this to me. Your life's work. She tilted her head, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. She took the briefcase from Matthew, opened it, and withdrew a thick document. The first page showed an equity chain diagram, color-coded paths tracing from Titan Capital through multiple offshore shell companies to a final destination. At the terminal box, one name, Qinghuan Family Trust. The trust's sole signatory, Vera Su. Ethan, look at this capital chain, she said, her finger resting on that final box. The initial $5 million in seed funding came from Titan's predecessor, Macroventures. The Series A of $50 million, Titan Capital. The 3 bridge loans you took over the past 2 years for expansion, all from the same trust. You thought you were dealing with cold, faceless investors. You courted them, reported to them, tried so hard to please them. And all along, it was me. You. His lips trembled, the blood draining from his face. He stared at that chain, traced it again and again, each time ending at the same place. No. You're lying, you're lying. How could you possibly have that kind of money? You stayed home every day. You didn't even hire a maid. Your clothes. My clothes are old because I kept what I wore in college. I find them comfortable, and I saw no need to show you my financial situation. Her voice dropped, carrying a weariness that seemed to have fermented long ago. Ethan, did it ever occur to you how a housewife, who can't read a balance sheet, and doesn't speak English, managed to rewrite the core algorithmic code that even your CTO couldn't understand, at 2 a.m. while you slept? Silence. Only the low hum of the air conditioner and Ethan's ragged breathing. It was you wrote those codes. The question emerged like a confession, the words scraping out of his throat. AI Precision Medicine Algorithm version 1.0, Architecture, Compilation Logic, Dataset Annotation, Training Framework, all mine. She held his gaze. Do you remember our first winter together? You'd landed your first outsourcing contract. The client needed a prototype medical imaging recognition system in 2 weeks. You had a junior front-end developer and an intern. What did you do? You came home and begged, Vera, help me. She looked past him at the glass case on the wall, the awards he'd collected, Top 40 Under 40, Tech Innovator of the Year. Every plaque bore his name. I stayed up 17 nights on the living room coffee table, writing the core algorithm module by hand. When you got the client's acceptance, you hugged me like a child, said, Vera, you're my good luck charm. A tremor passed through her voice, quickly suppressed. That system got referred, evolved into Epicteca's core product line. Every update, every iteration, I wrote it in the cracks of time, while you traveled, while you entertained clients, after you'd gone to sleep. And you took all of it to tech conferences and presented it as your overseas team's industry-academia integration triumph. His lips moved, looking for a defense. But against her calm, precise recounting, his lies crumbled. He sank back into his chair like a plant that had finally exhausted its last drop of water. So, you knew all along. His voice was sandpaper. Early on. She said it without hesitation. When you asked me to change the credits 2 years ago, I knew what you were doing. But I thought, maybe you had a reason. Maybe you just needed a higher valuation. Maybe when the company was stable, you'd come clean. Ethan, I gave you so many chances. On our 2nd anniversary, I asked you, if the company ever failed, would we still be happy living a simple life like before? You said, Vera, what would a woman know about business? She smiled then, faint and unreachable as moonlight on ice. From that day, I stopped waiting for you to come back. I started preparing. Matthew stepped forward and placed another document on the desk. It was thick, bound, stamped with Port City Intermediate People's Court, case acceptance notice, and a copy of a pre-litigation asset freeze order. Mr. Shen, Matthew said, adjusting his glasses, his voice as measured as a metronome. Based on the evidence submitted by our client and our preliminary review of Epicteca's financials, I have several points to address. First, he withdrew a copy of a bank statement and spread it on the desk. Regarding your claim of an 80 million renminbi loan from Ms. White's offshore fund for R&D, we've traced the actual flow. Of that sum, 63 million was split into 7 foreign accounts within 48 hours of receipt. 3 of those accounts are controlled by Ms. White's immediate family. 2 are held by an anonymous Cayman trust whose beneficiary ultimately is Ms. White herself. That loan was simply Epictec funds illegally transferred offshore. It's not marital debt, it's embezzlement under Article 271 of the Criminal Code. Ethan shuddered. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped. Additionally, Matthew continued, we've obtained marriage records from overseas registries. Mr. Shen, you married Ms. White in Las Vegas in November 4 years ago, while still legally married to Ms. Su in China. That's bigamy under Article 258 of the Criminal Code. The words landed like a hammer. Ethan collapsed. All fight drained from him. He sat limp, arms dangling, a weathered statue. Then, some desperate survival instinct kicked in. He scrambled around the desk and fell to his knees before Vera, clutching the hem of her jacket. Vera. Vera, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Tears and sweat ran down his face. I should never have lied to you. Bella means nothing. It was a lapse, a moment of stupidity. Please forgive me. I'll get rid of her. I'll terminate her contract. All the equity is yours. I'll do whatever you want. Vera, you loved me so much, you stayed up 17 nights for me, you can't just walk away. Please, one more chance. I'll be whatever you need. His pleas dissolved into broken sobs. Vera looked down at his face. The face that had promised her, I'll love you until the end of the earth, 5 years ago, and the face now streaked with tears and snot, twisted by fear and greed. They were 2 different photographs, and she could find no overlap. She stepped back, gently peeling his fingers from her jacket one by one. The motion was almost tender, like undoing a child's tangled knot. Ethan, she said, her voice quiet as frost, you said I loved you too much to walk away. You're right. I did love you. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have secretly used my trust fund to start your company. I wouldn't have turned down a Stanford postdoc to stay. I wouldn't have spent 17 nights debugging until my eyes bled. I truly believed we could make it through anything. She paused, looking past him to the golden light beyond the window. But what you did showed me you never loved me, you loved what I gave you. My money. My skills. My willingness to disappear. I bent so low for you, and you didn't cherish it. You took the code I wrote and used it to impress another woman. Ethan, love can't burn on one side. When the oil runs dry, you don't feel grateful, you just think the lamp's gone dim and it's time to replace it. Her gaze returned to him, clear and cold. So when you ask for forgiveness now, it's not because you've changed. It's because Titan Capital is calling. Because the law is at your door. Because Bella's already gone. You're scared. But I'm done being your safety net. She straightened her jacket, looking down at him kneeling among the shattered porcelain. Ethan, from today, your life has nothing to do with me. Matthew will handle all legal proceedings. All you need to do is cooperate and accept judgment. She turned and walked toward the door. Her steps were steady. Each one landed softly on the carpet, but the path she left seemed to glow, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a vitality that had been stifled too long and finally found release. Behind her, his desperate cries were muffled by the closing door. The corridor was silent. Afternoon sun streamed through the windows, laying down a clean, warm light. When Vera emerged from Epicteca's building, the sky was cloudless blue. A salty breeze from the river cooled her face, stirring the hair at her temple. Matthew caught up, walking beside her in the sun. He didn't speak for a while. Then he asked, gently, "How do you feel?" She looked at him and smiled, small, but real. "Like I just took a very long shower." 2 weeks passed, the summer heat evaporating like water on a hot stone. Temperatures peaked at 39 degrees Celsius 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and the tar on the road seemed to ripple in the haze. But the heat outside was nothing compared to the media firestorm engulfing the city. Epicteca's IPO was officially shelved. Nasdaq had sent inquiries. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley had withdrawn. Headlines blared, Port City AI prodigy accused of core technology fraud, with Ethan and Bella's photos plastered across every business site, captioned with words like deception, infringement, bigamy. Epicteca's office had become a ghost town. Suppliers picketed outside, employees waved white banners demanding unpaid wages, security guards were overwhelmed. The once bustling lobby held only an empty reception desk and pots of wilting plants. In the eye of this storm, the Port City Intermediate People's Court officially accepted the public prosecution of Ethan and Bella for embezzlement, fraudulent litigation, and bigamy. The trial fell on a Wednesday. The morning sky was unexpectedly clear, not the ominous overcast one might expect, but a brilliant, cloudless blue. Sunlight bounced off the courthouse's glass facade, leaving bright pools on the concrete steps. Crowds gathered from 7 a.m., journalists, bloggers, legal observers, former Epictec suppliers and employees. The steps were packed, bailiffs had to set up barriers and check passes in batches to maintain order. At 9 a.m., the doors of the third criminal court swung open. It was a medium-sized courtroom seating about 100. The audience benches were dark wood, embossed with the court's seal. The ceiling soared high, the air held that particular scent of old paper and aged furniture. Behind the judge's bench hung a crimson wall bearing the national emblem, gleaming gold in the soft light. Every seat was filled. In the front row sat several stern-faced individuals, representatives from Titan Capital and the Sioux family's trust managers. Behind them, rows of journalists with telephoto lenses and notepads. In the second row, a few well-dressed women who had flown in from the U.S. and Singapore, Vera's former Stanford classmates. In the back, several solemn former Epictec employees sat in silence, eyes fixed on the defendant's box. In the defendant's box, Ethan and Bella wore orange prison jumpsuits and blue plastic slippers. Their handcuffs had been removed but electronic monitoring bracelets glowed faintly at their wrists. 2 weeks in pre-trial detention had transformed the once glamorous pair. Ethan had lost significant weight, his jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. His hair had been shaved to stubble, revealing patchy white marks on his scalp. His cheeks were hollow, dark circles under his eyes, uneven stubble on his chin. He sat hunched, hands clasped on the table, knuckles white. He didn't look at the gallery or the judge, just at the table's dark grain, as if searching for an escape route in the wood. Bella looked worse. Her once lustrous hair was dull and frizzy, tied in a rough ponytail. Her face was bare, revealing broken capillaries beneath the surface, from stress, from late nights, from whatever had kept her awake. Her lips were chapped and peeling. Her eyes were red and swollen. She sat trembling, fingers twisting the hem of her jumpsuit. Whispers rippled through the gallery, "That's Bella. She looks like a different person. Used to be so flashy. Now she's just ordinary. At least Ethan's still sitting up. She looks like she's about to fall apart." On the other side of the courtroom, the plaintiff's table, Vera sat quietly. No suit today. She wore a simple white blouse with a tiny silver shell button at the collar, paired with tailored gray trousers. Her hair was loose, tucked slightly behind her ears, held by a thin silver clip. No jewelry. Just a touch of tinted moisturizer and lip balm. She looked clean, understated, utterly composed. Before her sat a glass of water and a slim notebook, its first page bearing 2 words in elegant script, truth and justice. She touched her pen to truth occasionally, as if reminding herself that those 2 words were all she needed. Beside her, Matthew Lynn wore his signature navy 3-piece suit, the silver balance pin at his collar glinting. 7 file folders lay before him, each marked with color-coded tabs, but he didn't open them, just sat with his head slightly raised, watching the bench with the calm of someone attending an academic seminar. Crack. The judge's gavel struck the block, its crisp sound echoing through the courtroom. The Port City Intermediate People's Court, 3rd Criminal Division, is now in session. The judge's voice was low and authoritative, a lean, sharp-eyed man in his early 50s. His tone carried the weight of the law. This trial concerns the public prosecution of defendants Ethan Shen and Bella White for embezzlement, fraudulent litigation, and bigamy. Prosecutor, read the indictment. The prosecutor rose, a woman in her 40s, short hair, face like granite. She opened her file and began. Defendant Ethan Shen, male, 32, native of Port City, founder and former CEO of Epic Tech. The investigation has established the following facts. Count 1. During his tenure as CEO, defendant Ethan Shen, in collusion with defendant Bella White, over a 3-year period, used fraudulent overseas technology contracts and falsified R&D invoices as a cover to transfer the company's funds, 84 million yuan in 48 separate transactions, to White's personal accounts and offshore entities controlled by her. This constitutes embezzlement of a particularly large amount under Article 271 of the Criminal Code. Murmurs rose and were quickly silenced. Count 2. The defendants conspired to present the fraudulent overseas license as genuine, representing Epic Tech's core technology as independently developed by White, thereby securing investment and valuation on false pretenses and misrepresenting the technology's provenance in IPO filings. This constitutes systematic fraud against investors and regulators, including fraudulent litigation and misrepresentation. Count 3. The prosecutor's voice hardened. Overseas marriage records confirm that defendant Ethan Shen, while still legally married to Vera Su, married defendant Bella White in Las Vegas in November 4 years ago. This constitutes bigamy under Article 258 of the Criminal Code. All charges are supported by documentary evidence, electronic records, witness testimony, and defendant confessions. The prosecution requests the court to render judgment accordingly. The prosecutor sat down. Silence for a few seconds. Then the judge turned to the defendant's box. Defendant Ethan Shen, do you dispute the charges? Ethan slowly lifted his head. His bloodshot eyes darted around, his lips moving soundlessly. Then, hoarsely, He stopped. He turned to the gallery, scanning the faces, searching for something, a familiar pair of eyes that had once offered him warm tea at midnight. But she wasn't there. Vera sat at the plaintiff's table, not looking at him, her gaze resting on the notebook before her, as if waiting for a test result she'd known all along. Ethan's eyes reddened. He cried out, voice cracking into hysteria, Your Honor. I confess. All of it. But Bella made me. She threatened to expose us if I didn't transfer the funds. I was coerced. I'll cooperate fully. I'll return the assets. Please show leniency. Bella's head snapped up. Her swollen eyes blazed. Ignoring the bailiff's warning, she shot to her feet and screamed, Ethan, you coward. You came to me. You said you'd get rid of her. You said once you made it, we'd run away together. You're the mastermind. Your signatures are on every account. I was just the puppet. Shut up. You shut up, you coward. Order. The judge's gavel crashed down. Defendants, you are in a court of law. Cease this behavior, or you will be cited for contempt. Bailiffs pushed them back into their seats. Both heaved for breath like caged animals, still glaring at each other with teeth bared. A journalist in the gallery scribbled, "Defendants turn on each other in open court." Vera hadn't looked up. She simply deepened the line beneath, "Truth." Ethan's lawyer, Derek Zhang, a veteran of Port City's legal circuit known for finding gray areas, rose, pale and sweating. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while my client admits to certain facts, we contend that the embezzlement charge leaves legal room for interpretation. Mr. Shen, as founder and legal representative, had significant discretion over company funds. Some of those funds did support overseas brand development. For instance, Ms. White's compensation as chief brand officer could reasonably be considered business expense. The so-called overseas loan, while possibly questionable in civil terms, does not." Matthew rose. He did it quietly, without fuss. He removed his glasses, polished them with a soft cloth from his inner pocket, then replaced them, the motion unhurried, almost meditative. Then he looked at Derek through the lenses. "Your Honor, may I provide supplementary testimony regarding Mr. Zhang's defense?" The judge nodded. Matthew withdrew a file and projected it onto the courtroom screen, a bank statement, brutally clear. "Mr. Zhang's reasonable business expenses, are these what he means?" Matthew traced a circle with his laser pointer. Item 1, Ms. White, as chief brand officer, made a single purchase at Bulgari in Geneva of 470,000 renminbi, an investment-grade emerald ring. Date, a Thursday in November. According to Epicteca's internal attendance records, she had no business travel that day. Under what definition is a non-travel day international luxury purchase a business expense? The screen shifted. Receipts, invoices, transfers, each more damning. Item 2, Ms. White made a down payment of $1.23 million on a Miami beachfront condo. The payment came from Epicteca's Cayman offshore subaccount. The property's purpose was listed as short-term accommodation during business trip. Item 3, Ms. White's parents received a 7 million renminbi premium elder care trust from a Sydney institution. The funds originated from Epicteca's offshore account. The beneficiaries are Ms. White's parents, no business connection to Epictec whatsoever. Matthew set down the pointer and looked at Derek. "Mr. Zhang, these are just 3 of 48 transactions. If you believe each can be explained as a reasonable business expense, I invite you to provide the court with a credible justification for each one. We have time." Derek's face was white as paper. He opened his mouth but nothing came out, just a dry, strangled sound. Laughter and whispers rippled through the gallery. Heads shook. Phones buzzed as people typed. Matthew sat down without further comment, gathering his files as calmly as he'd risen. The judge reviewed the materials, then turned to the defendants. "Do you have any final statements?" Ethan was helped to his feet by a bailiff. He was shaking like a leaf, eyes rimmed red, looking toward Vera. "Vera." His voice was raw, broken, carrying a pleading quality that felt almost unseemly. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Do you remember the first time we met? At the library, you handed me a textbook, you smiled and said the page you just fixed had an error. I thought, this girl is so smart, and then, how did I lose you?" Tears splashed onto his jumpsuit, darkening the fabric. Vera stood. She rose like a leaf lifted by a gentle current. She closed her notebook, laid it on the table, and looked across the distance, across the aisle, across the barrier of light and shadow, at his tear-streaked face. No anger. No disgust. No pity. Just something he hadn't seen in a long time, the clear, warm light she'd once held when she smiled at him in the library. But that light no longer included him. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you know why I smiled at you that afternoon? Not because I'd fixed the textbook. Because I noticed you sitting across from me, reading the same book. When you got to that page, you frowned, took out a pencil, and wrote a long derivation in the margin, and it was wrong. But you tried. That told me you loved it. I thought, this person truly loves code. She paused, looking past him at the empty space beside his seat. Later, you told me you wanted to build diagnostic tools that ordinary people could afford. I believed you. I thought we were heading in the same direction. I was ready to walk that path with you. But you changed. You falsified patents to inflate valuations. You stole company funds to feed Bella's vanity. You begged your ex-wife to take the blame in court. You said I lost you, Ethan, you lost yourself. I've been standing in the same place all along. You're the one who walked so far away I couldn't see you anymore. A tremor passed through her voice, tiny, barely audible, but real. So when you cry and say you're sorry, what are you sorry for? That you got caught? That Titan came knocking? That Bella turned on you? If I weren't here today, if you were still standing on that podium ringing the NASDAQ bell, would you remember the woman who stayed up all night coding for you? Would you remember those nights in the basement eating instant noodles? Would you even remember what my name was? Ethan, the law will give you a just sentence. But forgiveness, I can't give you that. I've forgiven you too many times, and each time, it only made you bolder. This time, let the law be the wife you'll respect. She fell silent. The room was so quiet you could hear the AC's low hum. In the gallery, someone sniffled. A woman in the back, dark hair, a cardigan, her face half hidden, wiped her eyes. The gavel fell. The judge rose, opened the verdict, and read. After deliberation by the full bench, having considered the prosecution, defendants, their counsel, and supporting evidence, the court hereby renders the following first-instance judgment. Defendant Ethan Shun, guilty of embezzlement, particularly large amount, 14 years, guilty of fraudulent litigation, 5 years, guilty of bigamy, 2 years. Concurrent sentences, 19 years imprisonment, forfeiture of all personal assets. Defendant Bella White, guilty of embezzlement, particularly large amount, 11 years, guilty of fraudulent litigation, 5 years. Concurrent sentences, 14 years imprisonment, with recovery of all illegal gains. All illegal proceeds are to be recovered and returned to Epic Tech. Both defendants have the right to appeal to the Port City High Court within 10 days. Crack. The gavel fell again. The crisp report echoed off the walls like a stone thrown into deep water, its ripples fading into the stillness. At 19 years, Ethan's body convulsed. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a name no one heard. He slumped, boneless, 2 bailiffs catching him and dragging him toward the door. Bella's scream was sharp and desperate, a wild animal's final cry. She fought, clawing toward the gallery, shrieking, "It's not fair. Vera, you'll die a horrible death. You'll die." The heavy door swung shut, cutting her off. Journalists rose, shutters clicking. Phones appeared, calls were made, notes were scribbled. Some rushed for the door to file their stories. Vera remained seated. She looked down at her open notebook, Truth and Justice. Sunlight from the high window fell across the page, a warm golden stripe. She watched it for a moment, then closed the notebook. Matthew glanced at her and nodded, not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement, like a fellow traveler reaching the end of a long road. Vera stood, tucked the notebook into her bag, and walked toward the exit. The corridor outside was long, with cream walls and gray tiles. Sunlight flooded in from a window at the far end. She walked that corridor slowly, steadily, like someone who had traveled a very long way and finally reached an open, clear horizon. She pushed open the door and stepped into the light. Port City's early summer sky was washed blue. Warm wind from the river carried salt and moisture. The old banyan tree by the courthouse steps rustled in the breeze, casting shifting gold coins of light across the concrete. Vera stood at the top of the steps and took a deep breath. Behind her, the courthouse held its files, its judgments, its closed cases. The arguments, the tears, the accusations, all reduced to cold case numbers and dates. Her part was done. She walked down the steps, toward the black car at the curb. As she opened the door, she glanced back at the flag whipping above the courthouse entrance. A faint smile touched her lips. "It's over," she said softly. Then she got in, closed the door, and left the heavy summer behind. The verdict swept through Port City's business community like a hurricane. Headlines shifted from Epic Tech IPO derailed to Epic Tech founder gets 19 years. Social media lit up. Someone dug up Vera's photo from the gala, the black dress and unadorned face glowing under the lights, captioned, "The Hidden Hand Strikes." Comments speculated on her 5 years of silence, called it strength or foolishness, argued over who she really was. Probably giving him one last chance, one comment read. Too bad he didn't deserve it. 20 miles away, at Port City's maximum security prison, Ethan Shen's new life had just begun. Admission was routine: physical exam, registration, cell assignment, orientation. His head was shaved. He was given a gray-blue uniform and worn plastic sandals. He followed the guard down a long corridor with green-painted walls, past cells lined with bars. Behind the bars, eyes watched him, curious, indifferent, appraising. He was assigned to a 6-man cell. The space was cramped: 3 metal bunk beds, concrete walls, no window, a single bulb behind a wire grill. A tin wash basin with a faded towel and toothbrush sat by the bed. The air smelled of disinfectant and damp fabric. His 5 cellmates were playing cards on the lower bunk at the far end. When he was brought in, a few glanced up, then returned to their game. No one spoke to him. Not even a taunt. That silence stung worse than mockery. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lights out at 10 p.m. Darkness poured in like water. He lay on the top bunk, facing the concrete wall, a faint stain in the shape of a bird's wing above him. He stared at it until his vision blurred, then closed his eyes. Vera's silhouette in the courtroom came to him, white blouse, gray trousers, her hair falling loose. She hadn't looked at him once. He remembered their first year together, a 120-square-foot basement apartment with green mold blooming on the walls, no heat. She wore a puffy jacket, huddled over the laptop, fingers stiff from cold, blowing on them between keystrokes. He'd asked her, "Don't you ever feel like you deserve better?" She'd looked up and smiled, "I chose you. I'd do it again." That smile, and the empty calm on her face when she'd said, "Ethan, you lost yourself," 2 images that wouldn't merge. He buried his face in the pillow and cried. Small, desperate sounds, muffled by the stale cotton. Tears soaked the fabric, mixing with the chemical tang of disinfectant. Across the room, someone turned over and muttered, "Stop crying. You should have thought about this before you got here." He went still, forcing his breath shallow. Across town, in the women's prison, Bella's days were no easier. She was assigned to a 12-person dormitory. No windows, just a high barred slit letting in gray light. The air held smells of detergent, mildew, floor cleaner. Her identity was exposed almost immediately. As she walked past the common room with her basin, she caught a glimpse of a printed photo taped to the wall, herself in that gold gown, arm in arm with Ethan, with "fraud" scrawled in red marker across it. She walked faster, water sloshing from her basin onto her sandals. But you can't outrun a reputation in prison. Among women inmates, the most despised weren't violent offenders or even white-collar criminals. It was the ones who'd climbed over others' lives to get what they wanted, and destroyed themselves in the process. For the next week, she was assigned the worst jobs: cleaning toilets, mopping the long corridors. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd grab a brush and bleach, working the stained grout between tiles. The chemical fumes made her eyes water. She'd wipe them on her sleeve and keep scrubbing. Behind her, whispers, look at her, used to wear couture. Heard she spent more on one bag than we eat in a year. You think she regrets it? Don't know, but her husband sure does. The men's side says he cries every night. Bella's brush paused. Her back stiffened, then sagged. She kept scrubbing, tears falling into the bleach water, washing away with the gray grime. Meanwhile, in the financial district, a different story was unfolding. Vera sat in her new office at the high-tech park, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view of the blue sea. The office wasn't fully furnished yet, the air smelled of paint and fresh wood, computers being installed, blueprints on the walls. But the energy of something beginning was unmistakable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Matthew, Ethan's sentence is final. No appeal. Bella waved hers. She read it, set the phone face down, and took a sip of coffee. The warmth spread through her chest. She looked out at the glittering sea, then opened her laptop. The screen lit up with an old photo, a young woman in a white dress, sitting by a library window, a thick book in her lap. Outside, a tree bloomed with purple flowers. Sunlight fell across her shoulder, and she smiled at something in the pages. Vera looked at the photo for a long time, then whispered, "You did good." She closed the screen. Gulls cried outside. A ship's horn sounded in the distance, long and low, like the first breath of a waking city. The new chapter was opening. The old one was already underwater, beyond reach. 3 autumns later, at the heart of Port City's tech district, a gleaming silver-white structure rose across a vast campus. Its curved glass facade threw off faint rainbows in the sun. A black granite stele at the entrance bore elegant silver characters, Veritech International AI Medical Research Center. Today, Veritech was listing simultaneously on the Hong Kong and Nasdaq exchanges. The campus bustled from dawn. Red carpets stretched for blocks. Flower arrangements from global partners lined the entrance, the scent of lilies and white roses floated in the crisp autumn air. Wall Street investors, European medical researchers, officials from the Ministry of Health, and dozens of international journalists filed in under security escort. The main hall was set up as a press conference space, rows of seats filled, long lenses bristling in the back. At 10 a.m., after a short video presentation, the host took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Veritech's global listing ceremony. Please join me in a warm round of applause for our founder, chairman, and chief scientist, Vera Su. Applause rose like a wave, swelling from every corner. Vera walked out from the wings. She wore a white bespoke suit, exquisitely tailored, with subtle silver thread embroidery at the collar and cuffs, honeysuckle, her mother's favorite flower, known in her hometown as winter endurance. Her hair fell in loose waves, catching the light. A touch of natural makeup. Her eyes, once so cold they seemed empty, now held a warm, steady glow, the look of someone who'd walked a long road and finally stood on ground high enough to see the horizon. She stepped to the microphone, looked down at the faces before her, Matthew Lin in his navy suit, the silver balance pin replaced by a small, Qinghuan medallion. The Titan Capital partners, beaming with pride. Stanford classmates, one holding a toddler who stared up at the lights with wide, curious eyes. Something warm filled her chest, settling deep and sure. "Thank you all," she began. "Thank you for being here to witness this small beginning that carries so many dreams." Her voice rang clear and warm through the hall. 3 years ago, I went through a very dark period. I stood on a terrace at a gala and heard people call me hag, housewife, good for nothing. I didn't argue. Because I knew, some truths can't be won with words. They take time. They take action. They take that final result that shows everyone, your worth is not defined by anyone else. A hush fell. A few heads nodded. Over these 3 years, I turned the code on my scratch paper, those late-night flashes of insight, into Veriteca's core technology, the Qinghuan version 3.0 precision medicine algorithm. This year, it passed phase 3 clinical trials in 7 countries. In early cancer screening, it's 37% more accurate than current standards. That means millions of patients each year could be diagnosed earlier, treated sooner, and get back to their lives. She paused, looking at her friend with the baby in the front row, and smiled. I kept thinking, what could I do with all this, my knowledge, my time, the unexpected wealth that came my way, to make some corner of the world better? So today, at this milestone, I'd like to announce something. She took a folded paper from her pocket, opened it, and read, Veriteca's first founder's share dividend, 5 billion renminbi. I've placed it entirely in the China Women and Children's Medical Assistance Foundation. This money is for the women who, like my mother, were too sick and too poor to walk into a hospital. The hall fell silent for 2 beats. Then the applause came, louder, longer than before. People rose from their seats, some wiping their eyes. Cameras clicked like summer rain. Vera stood in that sustained applause, head bowed slightly, as if offering a quiet thanks to someone unseen. Then she looked up at the room, and at the cameras beaming the signal worldwide, and smiled. A woman's worth has never needed to be defined by marriage or by a man. We all have the right to live for ourselves, at least once. Thank you all. She stepped back, ceding the stage for the bell-ringing ceremony. Hundreds of miles away, in the maximum security prison's common room, a wall-mounted TV flickered with the live broadcast. Afternoon sun striped the concrete floor through high barred windows. The TV's volume was low, but the image of Vera in white, smiling under the lights, stood out sharply against the gray room. Ethan sat on a bench, a plastic bowl on his lap, white rice and boiled cabbage, no oil, just salt. His hands, rough from labor, held the bowl stiffly. Dirt was embedded under his nails. He stared at the screen, at the woman who was smiling. She looked nothing like the woman he'd known. The grim armor of that charcoal suit was gone. She'd softened, opened, become someone lighter, brighter, like a plant that had finally found the sun. Her easy smile, the way she talked about value and self-definition, reminded him of a girl in a library, laughing about a textbook correction and saying, I chose you. I'd do it again. His grip tightened. The bowl's rim pressed into his palm. A splash of cabbage water spotted his trousers. He didn't notice. On screen, Vera accepted the bell mallet from the host. With the crowd counting down, she raised it, and struck. Dong! The bell's pure, deep note resonated through the common room's stale air, bright and forward-looking, before fading into the dust and heat of the afternoon. Ethan set the bowl on his knee, lifted a rough hand, and rubbed his eyes. They were dry, but the gesture was automatic. His hand bore a fresh cut from the workshop the day before, the movement opened it, and a thin line of blood appeared. He stared at the TV as the feed cut to the exchange's exterior. Then he lowered his head. In the corner of the common room, another inmate looked at Ethan's bowed shoulders, his slight tremor. A beat of silence. Then the man shook his head, gathered his own bowl, and walked to the door without a word. Outside, the sun still shone. Wind rustled the sparse greenery beyond the wall. The sound mingled with the distant bell, as ordinary as any autumn afternoon. And back in Port City, the crowd spilled from the hall into the plaza. Sunlight fell on every shoulder, warm and wide. Vera walked at the front, Matthew beside her, her team around her. She looked up at the endless blue sky and breathed deeply. The autumn wind was cool. The sun was warm. Far out on the bay, a white freighter traced a long, dissolving wake across the water. Gulls wheeled above the campus and turned toward the open sea. Vera smiled and kept walking. Behind her, the silver-white buildings gleamed in the light like some great newly awakened creature, breathing quietly. The road ahead was long and open. She walked with steady, light steps, like someone who'd finally taken that very long shower, put on clean clothes, and stepped out into the sun. Her ocean of stars was spreading before her.